Hi, welcome back. It's Neil here again. We're in week 2. We're looking at pricing, chapter 13 of Horngren, edition 15. And we're really getting into this model which I've designed and is not really made clear in many management accounting textbooks that I'm aware of. And as I showed you in the last session, there is this emphasis on the right-hand side of activity-based costing. How can we understand better the real costs of making a product? How can we understand better the most profitable customers? How can we understand and identify our best suppliers? But what we're covering now is actually we're focusing on pricing decisions. We want to make the distinction between short-term pricing and long-term pricing, because in the short term we really can't change many things. And there's a learning objective that we're going to cover with that very quickly. Then I'm going to show you an example of what short-term pricing we'll consider in terms of the information. Then we're going to go over to have a look at the long-term considerations of pricing and bring in other relevant factors that are important for the long-term sustainability of a particular pricing strategy. And basically that's what it's all about. When we talk about long-term, it's about setting a price that is sustainable, that will actually make money for the business in the long term. But in the short term, it's about making a quick profit. It's about taking advantage of some excess capacity. It's about taking advantage of an opportunity that will not repeat itself again and again and again. So let's get into the good stuff, shall we? Move into, first of all, learning objective 1. Learning objective 1 is we want to discuss 3 major factors that affect pricing decisions. Now you know what they are. They are customers, competitors, and costs. The customers are always looking for a cheaper product. The customer's always looking for higher quality, or they want the product delivered yesterday. So it's always cost. It's either price, it's either quality, or it's on-time delivery or some service value that goes with that product or service. That's what customers want. But then there are competitors out there that customers are also looking at as an alternative to your product. So you need to understand the competitors out there and adjust your prices accordingly. You can't always have a high price if it's much higher than the competitors in the same value proposition, what we call functional price point. That is a price point at which customers expect a certain degree of function in your product. Then we have costs at the end. Now we're going to get into costs later in another session, but for now let's have a look and understand first that when we're talking about pricing strategy, we need to understand where are we with our product with respect to what customers perceive about functionality of the product, and how do we beat our competitors. Why do customers buy from you and not the competitors? And then we have the costs. How much does it cost to make this product? In the short run, some of these factors will not matter, but in the long run, we need to consider these in a little bit more detail. So they're the 3 factors that we need to understand for learning objective 1. As we can see from this example, based on 644 interviews with Chinese suppliers, notice that the number 1 challenge in 2011 when I did interview them, I've interviewed several hundred since then, and it's still the same, and that is cost control. Interesting? Are we surprised? Not really. But look at the second challenge, competition. That is, 2 of those 3 C's are in the top 2 challenges faced by Chinese suppliers. That would not be any different if we spoke to Vietnamese suppliers or Cambodia or India or Burma. Cost control and competition are huge pressures that are bearing down on any factory that is in a rapidly developing country in this world. And so what we try to do is we need to understand what is the source of these pressures. They normally come from customers asking for cheaper goods, and also the other pressure, that is competition, other factories just setting up in no time flat. As soon as you got a new idea, suddenly other factories are around with an idea too, and they are offering the same offering that you're offering, and suddenly customers have a field day because they have so much opportunity to choose from, so many alternatives. And so this is the challenge facing real factories in developing countries today. So let's get on to the good stuff, shall we? If we have a look at how these factories are responding to this number one challenge, we can see those that have a cost control as the number one challenge, and we're talking about over 212 here, notice that the number one response is automation. Automation, 14.15% said I'm automating. Second is improving production efficiency. Then collecting more quotations. That is, they're not changing themselves, but they're trying to get more quotations from, say, material suppliers of components to their own assembly and factory operations. Then we have research and development. So it's really interesting. It's a very positive thing that we see suppliers responding to cost pressure in terms of automation, looking to improve efficiency, and research and development. And this is really takes on to what we're going to cover later in this session, and that is this notion of target costing. How can we better improve our cost structure so we can have a long-term sustainable product at a reasonable price, even though costs are rising day by day, week by week, month by month, year in, year out? That's the big question. And we look to target costing, we look to value analysis, we look to process value analysis, we look to design engineering, we look to functional analysis. So there's all these different approaches that we can use under the umbrella of target costing to actually deal with cost control. And it's really good to see here that Chinese factories are responding in the right way, in the way that we would expect. But if you add this up, that's less than 30% out of 202 that are responding in this positive way to cost control pressures. So let's get on to the next session, time horizons and pricing. And this is learning objective 2. The two big points here. Number one, short run pricing decisions have a time horizon of less than 1 year. Include decisions as pricing one time only special order with no long run implications, and adjusting the product mix and output volume in a competitive market. So it's very short term. We're not including a lot of fixed costs in these decisions as being relevant. It's not until we look at long run pricing decisions that have a time horizon for over 1 year or longer to include decisions as pricing a product for a major market where there is some leeway in setting the price. So, and this is a little bit different from long run pricing decisions that have a time horizon of 1 year or longer, and include decisions as pricing a product in a particular market where you're actually expected to establish that product in the market for a long time. So just keep that in mind. There are short run pricing decisions, long run pricing decisions. The scope of costs that are relevant for long run pricing decisions is much broader, whereas for short run pricing decisions, the scope of relevant costs is much narrower. There's less cost to be considered as being relevant for short run pricing decisions. I think that's the biggest difference. And because in the long run pricing decision context, the scope of relevant costs is broader, we need to have more tools, more ideas about how to manage this broader scope of costs. For example, fixed advertising costs, fixed overhead. Now they become relevant in the long run. Research and development, tooling costs, prototyping costs. These costs in the short run are not relevant to a once-off decision, pricing decision. But in the long run, these costs become very, very important. And we're going to look at an example that actually teases out the differences between these two groups of costs. In Learning Objective 2, we want to understand how companies make long-run pricing decisions. So let's have a look at Austal Computers. They make computers, and we'll look at their short-run proposition to begin with. They make two brands of computers and the offer. Datatech has asked Austal to bid on supplying 5,000 Pro Value computers over 3 months in 2008. So, what is Austal going to do? Well, Austal is already making lots and lots of computers, but let's have a look at the relevant costs for Austal. There are direct materials, direct labor, and overhead of $460, $64, $50, making up $574. There are $50 in fixed costs of added capacity to make the ProVal computer. That is $250,000 of fixed costs divided by 5,000 units. So this is fixed costs associated with the additional capacity. What about market intelligence? In other words, remember, we've got customer is asking for Austal to make the computer. There are competitors and there are costs. We've got the customer information, what they want to buy. They want to buy 5,000 at a certain price. We have cost information. We've just worked out the relevant costs. Now, what about the competitor information? Let's have a look. The competing bids are going to be between $596 and $610 per computer. Austal makes a bid of $595 computer, just below the competing bid, to ensure that Austal will win the bid. We can see that, can't we? If it wins the bid, the operating income will increase by $105,000 in relevant revenues. That is 5,000 units times $595 per unit. So that's $2.975 million minus relevant costs of $2.87 million. So the question is, management strategy is to bid as high above $574, which is the relevant costs per computer, as possible, while remaining lower than the competitor's bid. So we've got $574 is the lowest one and $595 is the highest one. That is a decision that is very, very short term, and it's considering only the relevant costs. Now, as we're going to find out shortly, this is not sustainable in the long run, because now in the long run we need to include more fixed costs. Let's go to the next page, shall we? So let's have a look at the total manufacturing costs of Pro Value. If we're going to consider long run prices, now we must calculate the full cost of producing and selling Pro Value. Now, what you have here in front of you is basically the top part of a profit and loss statement. That is revenue minus total manufacturing costs, and we're not, cost of goods sold is the same as that if there's no beginning and ending work in process or finished goods inventory. Okay, so we're not considering any changes in inventory. So revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit, you see. But what we're going to see shortly, that does not consider the selling, administration or financing costs. We'll get to that shortly, but right now let's just have a look at these manufacturing costs. The total manufacturing cost per unit for the year, 150,000 units, $680. Now that's much higher than this short-term business opportunity. Very interesting, isn't it? That we may take this short-term opportunity and find that it's profitable, but it's not going to be profitable in the long run, because in the long run we need to cover the fixed costs, overhead, we need to cover the fixed labor, we need to cover fixed other costs, for example sales, administration, financing costs. We need to cover all these costs in the long run. So let's take this to the next level, where we start to consider the parts of sales, admin costs that may be relevant to sustaining the long-term pricing strategy of Pro Value computer. So at the moment, if we just consider manufacturing costs, it's $680. So the pricing really should not be below $680 in the long run. So let's have a look when we go to the next level, using value chain activity-based costing, notice now that we have turned the profit and loss statement on its head. We're not just considering manufacturing costs, we're just looking at the direct costs over long term that we can find a cause and effect relationship with the manufacturer of the product. And so we're not using the accounting standards to differentiate manufacturing costs from sales costs. Now we're looking at the cause effect. What resources do manufacturing each computer consume of pro value? Okay, we make one computer, what resources are consumed? That is the big question that activity-based costing tries to answer. So when we assign costs based on activity-based costing, here is what we get. Now we're starting to not only bring in cost of goods sold, that's $680 here. Now we're going to include research and development costs, which may have been capitalized in the past, but now we need to include it as an operating cost because it is relevant for the decision. What is the decision? What should our long-term pricing strategy be? Design costs of product and process, $20 per unit. Marketing administration costs. Remember, marketing administration would normally be in selling, admin, and finance category in the profit and loss statement, not normally in the top half of the profit and loss statement. Now we have distribution costs, customer service costs again. So we have an extra operating cost of $220. When we add that to $680, now we have $900 as the full cost of the product. So if we want to recoup the full cost of the product in the long run, then we need to consider a price that is closer to $900. Now we're getting a bit confused because now originally in the short run we're just considering a little opportunity that a customer is offering a certain price. $574 to $595 is the range. Now we start to consider the long run. We need to consider what is the cost, what are the relevant costs, and they tend to increase in the long run because we're bringing in more fixed costs in the short run, but they tend to become relevant costs in the long run because they're relevant to the sustaining of the development of that computer. Research and development costs, prototyping, design costs, marketing administration, they're suddenly relevant to the long-term marketing, design, development of this computer product. And so they are relevant for the long-term pricing decision. So there you can see we can get into trouble here when we're pricing. Are we pricing for the short term or are we pricing for the long term? This is a very important decision to make, to answer before we go to work out what pricing we should set for that product. So let's go one step further, shall we? We can, in the long run, just go straight to the market. What do customers want? And then set our market price. It's going to be much lower than $900 if customers do not bid that much. Or we can just focus on cost base, somewhere between $680 and $900 to try and recoup as much of that $220 extra as possible. Later on, I'm going to show you a strategy where we can actually cut that cost down, that 220 and that 680, so we can find a sustainable way to set a lower long-term price that will cover the full cost of manufacturing the product. And we do that under this guise of target costing. Yes. So let's have a look at that, shall we? So here we have market-based approach, and it starts with the target price, and then we might move down to a target cost afterwards, after knowing that we need to have a certain margin. Learning objective 3, price products using target costing approach. Target costing identifies an estimated price customers are willing to pay and then computes a target cost to earn the desired profit. So we're working out a price. We want to make a 10% margin, then we work back from there, and that gives us our target cost. Well, that's going to turn upside down our calculations. We start off with 680 manufacturing costs, then suddenly it balloons out to 900. But now this new approach, learning objective 3, is say, well, hang on, let's just put that aside for a moment. Let's just consider what are customers prepared to pay for the price point or the functionality that we are offering to the market. Maybe they're prepared to pay $800 or $790. Is there some way, if we want to make a 10% margin, then we add in a 10% profit, and so therefore our target cost comes below $800, maybe down to $750 or lower. Then under target costing, the goal is to actually try and match that target price, that target cost of $750, if that is our target cost. Can we do that? I don't know. Are there techniques that enable us to focus on meeting a certain target cost? Yes, there are, and we're going to explore some of these approaches. So here we have 5 steps in developing target prices and target costs. Number 1, develop a product that satisfies the needs of potential customers. What do we mean by that? It's more about functional analysis. That is, products at different price points are expected or perceived by consumers to exhibit certain functions. So Canon and Nikon have very high-end cameras. 20,000 Hong Kong dollars, 30,000, 40,000, very, very expensive. And so customers expect the functionality to be very, very big. Okay, but those same camera manufacturers are making cameras for 1/10 of that price. Customers of those cameras don't expect as much functionality. So you see that a pricing strategy depends on where are you locating your product with respect to the different functionality that your markets are expecting. That's what we mean by number 1. Then we look at number 2, choose a target price. Number 3, target cost per unit. Number 4, perform cost analysis. Then number 5, perform value engineering. What I'm going to show you next is, of these 5 steps, the most critical ones are number 1 and number 5, because number 1 is the strategy, it's the choice to compete in a certain market, and that tends to drive everything else you're going to do after that. Number 2, 3, and 4 is basically the accounting background. Once you choose the price, we work backwards, how much profit we want to make, and then we can perform some cost analysis. But number 5 is where the real magic happens, and that's where we use various techniques to try and reduce our costs of manufacture, our costs of selling, our costs of research and development, to fit within the boundaries set by step number 1 and step number 2. So let's have a look at step 1 and 5, and as you guessed, that fits into what we call value engineering, where we are locating products with a certain function, where customers at a certain price point expect a certain range of functions. We are then making choices about how we design that product within that functional area. So how we design, whether we have lots of components or not so much components. Do we have modular systems that snap in together, or do we customize particular systems? Design analysis encapsulates those strategies. Third, maybe process value analysis, where given a certain functionality that we're targeting, given a certain designs that we have chosen, is there some way that we can improve the processes that are used to manufacture the product? So now we can return to the prior example, Exhibit 13.3. We have Pro Value again. Remember, they had a short-term offer to offer a computer between $574, $595. $574 was just higher than the direct costs associated with manufacturing the computer. Of course, we later found out that the total manufacturing costs of the computer, materials, labor, and overhead, was $680. Yes, you got that. But we want to go one step further and realize that, look, we have all these other costs, $220 of which make up a total product cost of $900. Wow, how can we make profits on this computer for $900? Well, in the short term, that is not relevant if you have the capacity, if you have the materials, if making that computer does not upset the long run sales channels that you are selling to, which tend to absorb all of these other costs. But in the short run, we're really just focusing on the direct costs, and we could sell that computer for a smaller price and still make a contribution margin to all of these other fixed costs that are fixed in the short run. But in the long run, these become relevant, and this is where step 5 of target costing becomes important, because now we need to use the magic to try and reduce these research and development costs, these design costs, marketing costs, distribution costs, customer costs. Is there some way, is there some technique out there that we can use to reduce these costs? Yes, there is. In the next session, we're going to go through these techniques that can be used to minimize these costs. Hi, back here again, and as we finished up in the last session, we actually were talking about the difference between short run and long run decisions, and how each of these different focuses on the timing, that is short run and long run, have different implications for the costs that are deemed to be relevant for the decision. As we go more long term, then a broader range of costs become relevant. That is, more of the fixed costs in the short term become relevant in the long run, because in the long run, it's about sustaining the business. It's about contributing to all of the costs of the business. And in the long run, we need to make money. We need to make money that is in excess of both the fixed and variable costs. So we're looking at the example of activity-based cost manufacturing costs. We have Pro Value again, and we're going to look at how functional analysis or design analysis or process value analysis, each of these may be relevant to helping Pro Value to reduce its costs so it can meet a particular target cost. And by meeting that target cost, they'll make a little bit of money in order to sell for a certain target price that fits a particular consumer target market that we identified, because we have a product with certain functions and we know consumers are prepared to pay a certain price under functional analysis. So let's have a look at, shall we? We're starting with Pro Value. Notice we have manufacturing cost per unit. they're a computer and it's $680 total manufacturing costs. That was just manufacturing costs, $680. But when we considered activity-based analysis of costs, notice that now we have many other costs that need to be considered. For example, we have research and development costs, design, cost of product process, marketing costs, distribution costs, customer service costs, and the full cost of the product now is $900. We have additional $220 to consider. Wow, can we make a product for $900 per unit and then sell it for less than $900? What do we have to do? Well, one solution is in target pricing, finding out what price are customers prepared to pay. That's step one of target costing. Then we can work down to a target cost, step two. Step three, step 2 and 3 is finding out a price that customers are prepared to pay for a certain functionality. Step 2 and 3 is working out that target price and the target cost. Step 5 is where we go ahead to actually reduce costs, taking particular actions to reduce the costs to fit within the target costs. So here is what ProValue can do. ProValue made 150,000 units in 2013 and 200,000 units in 2014. This 200,000 units is budgeted for 2014. So here are 6 ways ProValue can do to reduce its costs to a target cost of $720. Really? Remember, we're starting at $900. Can we bring it down to $720? That means you're actually cutting $180 of costs per unit. Wow, that might make us profitable and sustainable in the long term if we can sell the computer for more than $720. Remember, this is long-term pricing strategy. Okay, what can we do by reducing costs through better design? Well, we can have less costs in materials, and we find that direct materials, we can reduce that from $460 down to $385 per unit. We could have fewer components. Ordering and receiving costs, we reduce that from $12 to $8.50 per unit, because we have fewer components. That's the design, so therefore we don't have to do as many orders. What about having a better process? Remember, there are 3 parts of value engineering: functional analysis, that is deciding where the product is located in a certain price range where customers expect a certain functionality. Once we've decided that, and that's step 1 of target costing, then we can use design analysis and process value analysis to fit within the boundaries set by the functional analysis. Step 1 of target costing, design analysis and activity-based analysis is part of step 5 of the target cost process. So here we go. We're going to reduce costs through having a better process, activity-based process. And we have fewer machine hours per unit. So we have more efficiency in machining. Fewer direct labor hours per unit. We can cut that down, make people more efficient, for example. Fewer testing hours per unit, 30 hours down to 15 hours, $60 down to $30 per unit. And lower defect rate, that's very important. Reducing the defects naturally improves the yield, naturally improves the, the yield and the profitability of the whole process, because you're using fewer inputs for every unit of output. So you're going to save money. Lower defect rate from 8% down to 6.5%. That's going to reduce those costs from $8 to $6.50 per unit. So what is the result? Well, this is 150,000 units of ProValue in 2013. Here is the budgeted of 200,000 units of ProValue in 2014. notice the differences. Number one, we have direct materials. Originally, cost per unit is $460. We can reduce that down to $385. Direct manufacturing labor. Originally $3.20 per hour, reduce that down to $2.65. Next, machine hours can be more efficient. We're using the same amount of machine hours, but we're actually making more units. 300,000 hours here for 150,000 units. We're going to use the same amount of machine hours for 200,000 units. So there's savings here. Next, we have ordering and receiving. We have less orders per component, so therefore the actual total cost for 150,000 units is 22,500. Now we only need 425 components per unit, so it's only going to cost us 21,250 for 200,000 units. You can see that we're making savings here. Next, testing and inspection. We have, it's costing us $30 per unit. We've cut that down to 15. So now that's an immediate reduction in total costs of 4.5 million down to 3 million. Rework, 8% down to 6.5%. Obviously the rework hours is going down, and so the amount cost per unit is going to be less. So let's have a look at the totals that come out as a result of the old approach, that is $680 that we allocated. Now we have the budgeted amount of 200,000 units, and the budgeted manufacturing cost per unit is being reduced from $680 down to $540 as a result of these design analysis changes, as a result of the process value analysis interventions. So we've improved the design, we've improved the process, and we've been able to reduce costs accordingly. So this is a real example where at the end of the day we had pro value. In the long run, they're facing a challenge of a $900 cost, or manufacturing cost of $680. Now in the long run, that is not sustainable unless we do something to address that, because over time customers are going to look for more functionality for the same price. Competitors are going to come along and offer cheaper prices, and also costs might increase in the long run. So what do? Well, we look to design analysis to reduce costs by having fewer components for the same design. We change the design so we use fewer components. Or we look to process value analysis, where we look to cut out non-value added activities, and in this way we're able to reduce our costs to fit a certain target cost that allows us to make a certain margin with a target price that allows us to sell a product into the market in the long run that is sustainable in terms of contributing to the long-term costs of the organization. So I hope you can see the big picture, not just theoretical frameworks in how to strategically implement target costing, but real practical approach in implementing target costing, like actual things that you can do to reduce costs of manufacturing a product that focuses on design analysis, that focuses on process value analysis, after first identifying the functional analysis, that is the functional location that the product you have with a certain amount of functions fits within a certain price point that customers are willing to pay for your product. So I hope you understand how that all fits together. It's basically step 1 and step 5 of target costing, what we have here. Step 2, 3, and 4 is basically the accounting that goes behind the scenes, but step 1 is big in terms of the functional analysis. Step 5 is big in terms of the actual steps you take to deal with a particular target cost. Design analysis, process value analysis. So bring that together into this framework. I hope it's clearer for you. Don't forget, if you haven't done so already, click subscribe on the button below to receive more videos in this great topic. Thank you very much, and catch you in the classroom.